Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving into a case that isn't just heartbreaking, it shook the entire United States. A 3-year-old girl disappears in the middle of the night, right from the safety of her own home. Less than 24 hours later, her body is discovered in a nearby creek, in a condition too horrific to imagine. At first, it seemed like the case was solved. The father, who was the last person to see her alive, was arrested and charged with her murder. There was a confession, a sleepless night, and the community demanding justice. But what if I told you, everything was wrong from the very beginning? What if the real killer was actually a convicted sex offender, a man lurking just blocks away, who had a long, dark history and a sickening plan that played out perfectly while police went after the wrong person? This isn't just a story about a murder. It's a chilling example of how a broken justice system can destroy innocent lives, while the true monster walks free. A case that is deeply disturbing, infuriating, and haunting, not only because of the crime itself, but because of the years of pain that followed for those who were never supposed to suffer. Let's unravel the timeline, expose the errors, and examine the human cost in the case of Riley Fox, one of the most devastating wrongful accusations in modern American criminal history. Part 1, Gone in the Night, the clue that was buried by a confession. Wilmington, Illinois, a peaceful small town where people still left their doors unlocked at night and neighbors greeted each other like family. But in the early hours of June 6, 2004, that peaceful image was shattered by something no one could have seen coming. A 3-year-old girl named Riley Fox vanished in the middle of the night, right from inside her own home. Kevin Fox, Riley's father, woke up that morning to discover the sofa, where his daughter had fallen asleep the night before, was empty. No sign of forced entry. No strange sounds. But Riley was gone. "Riley? Where are you?" He called out, at first worried, then quickly panicked. He searched every room, checked outside, called neighbors. And shortly after, he phoned the police. A community-wide search for Riley Fox began immediately. Just hours later, a devastating scene unfolded. Riley's lifeless body was discovered in a shallow creek in a wooded area not far from home. Her hands were bound with duct tape. Her mouth had been sealed shut. And signs pointed to a brutal assault before her death. The town was in shock. This kind of thing just didn't happen here. People gathered to light candles, post Riley's photos on every telephone pole, and pray for justice. But behind the scenes, investigators were already focusing in on someone, and that someone wasn't a stranger. With no direct evidence and no eyewitnesses, police turned their attention to Kevin, Riley's own father, just 2 days after the murder. Why? Because in many child homicide cases, statistics show that the perpetrator is often someone close. And in their eyes, Kevin was the easiest target. He was brought in for questioning. And what followed would change his life forever. Kevin underwent 14 hours of non-stop interrogation. No lawyer. No sleep. No break. And finally, in a moment of mental exhaustion, broken from grief and confusion, he said something that would come back to haunt him. "I'm not sure, maybe I gave her a bath that night. Maybe she slipped. I really don't remember." That vague, half-spoken sentence, said by a grieving father under extreme duress, was interpreted by police as a confession. There was no full video recording. No legal counsel. But that didn't matter. Kevin was arrested. And overnight, he went from grieving father to the man who murdered his daughter. Here's something that got missed in all the headlines. At the crime scene, police recovered a pair of sneakers, discarded near the creek. And inside, a name written in marker, Scott Eby. Yes, a full name. And Eby? He had a criminal record. He was a known offender. And he lived just a few blocks away from the Fox home. So, was he questioned? No. The shoes were logged as evidence, and then completely ignored. Why? Because police already had a confession. And for them, that was case closed. This was the moment where the system failed, not just Kevin, but Riley too. Let's stop here for a moment. What happens when justice isn't about the truth, but about wrapping up a case as quickly as possible? Kevin Fox wasn't a perfect man. He was just a father in shock, grieving the unimaginable. And instead of being protected by the system, he was crushed by it. Meanwhile, the real killer was still free. Still breathing. Still walking the same streets. Maybe even smiling as the wrong man sat in jail. Part 2, The Man Behind the Darkness, Who Was Scott Eby? Let's go back, this time not to the crime scene, but to the man who left behind the most damning clue, a pair of shoes with his name written inside. A name that sat quietly in an evidence locker while another man faced the death penalty. That name? Scott Eby. Scott Eby didn't just wake up one day and decide to become a monster. His life was a long descent, starting from a childhood riddled with instability, neglect, and abuse. By the time he was a teenager, Scott already had a rap sheet. He broke into houses, stole cars, and was often in trouble with the law. But behind every criminal act was something even more disturbing, a craving for control, for power, and for hurting others. As he grew older, that need only escalated. By the early 2000s, Eby had become more than just a thief. He was a registered sex offender, having attacked a relative, someone who should have been safe around him. But even after serving time, Eby wasn't rehabilitated. He was just more careful. More methodical. He was living just miles from the Fox family in Wilmington, Illinois. And on the night of June 5, 2004, the night Riley disappeared, he was free, unmonitored, and still consumed by violent fantasies. So what did he do? He walked right into an unlocked house. A quiet neighborhood. A sleeping child. And no one watching. I didn't go in there to hurt anyone, Eby would later claim. But once I saw her, it just happened. Just happened. No. This wasn't an accident. This was a calculated attack, carried out by someone who had done it before, and would likely do it again. Years later, when finally confronted, Eby admitted the truth. He had broken into the Fox home while Riley was asleep. Kevin and his other child were in the house, but asleep in another room. Eby abducted Riley, drove her to a nearby park bathroom, where he brutally assaulted her, then dumped her body in a nearby creek to cover his tracks. And the worst part? He confessed only after DNA evidence cornered him. He would have walked free otherwise. In that confession, Eby also said something chilling. I threw away my shoes after. Didn't think anyone would look. And he was right. For 6 years, no one did. So how was the truth finally revealed? It started with a determined legal team, one hired by the Fox family after Kevin was released from jail thanks to lack of physical evidence. They pushed for a full re-examination of the crime scene materials, including the duct tape and Riley's clothing. And in 2010, 6 years after the murder, a DNA match popped up in the FBI's system. That match? Scott Eby. Suddenly, the puzzle fit together. The shoes. The location. The prior offenses. And now, the DNA. There was no more denying it. Kevin Fox was innocent. And Scott Eby was the true killer. Let's pause here for a second. A man with a history of sexual violence leaves shoes with his name at the crime scene of a murdered girl, and no one bothers to follow up. This isn't just negligence. It's systemic failure. Had police looked into that clue, Riley's case might have been solved within days, not years. And Kevin wouldn't have had to endure the public shame of being labeled a murderer. His son wouldn't have grown up watching his father dragged through hell for a crime he didn't commit. But maybe the scariest part. If Eby hadn't confessed, if the DNA match hadn't come through, he might have killed again. Part 3, the prison confession that broke the case wide open. Years had passed since the heartbreaking loss of Riley Fox. Her father, once wrongly accused, had been cleared by DNA evidence, but the real perpetrator had yet to face justice. Then, out of nowhere, a new lead emerged from behind bars. Scott Eby was already serving time for unrelated crimes when his name suddenly came up in connection with Riley's case. His DNA had matched evidence from the crime scene, breathing new life into the long-cold investigation. Rather than confront him outright, authorities took a different approach. They placed an undercover officer in his cell, posing as just another inmate. Over time, Eby began to talk, little by little, sharing disturbing pieces of a story only the true culprit could know. In hushed tones, he revealed details about a child, about a night he wished he could erase. He described scenes eerily close to what had happened to Riley. Eventually, he admitted what detectives had long suspected. "I never knew her name, not until I saw it on the news." What followed was even more revealing. Eby wrote a letter, not to the authorities, but to his own mother. In that letter, he confessed to everything. He admitted to breaking into the Fox home that night, drunk and desperate. When he saw a child asleep on the couch, he made an unthinkable choice. He abducted her, harmed her, and left her body in the creek. It was chilling. It was gut-wrenching. But it was finally the truth. He claimed remorse. But by then, the damage was irreversible. His confession matched the DNA findings and aligned with what had been known all along. Kevin Fox had been innocent. Scott Eby was formally charged with multiple serious crimes, including murder and assault. He pleaded guilty in 2010 and was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Justice had finally arrived, but it had taken far too long. This was more than just a tragic crime. It was a case study in how flawed systems can compound grief. An innocent father was vilified. A real predator was overlooked. The failure to follow evidence nearly ruined a man's life, and let a killer walk free. It makes you wonder, how many others have faced the same fate? In our final part, we'll reflect on what this story tells us, not just about justice, but about how easily it can go off track. Stay with us. Part 4, A Wound That Never Heals, and a Lesson We Can't Forget. The story of Riley Fox doesn't simply end with the conviction of the man who took her life. It leaves behind a heavy sense of sorrow, a reminder that justice, when delayed or misdirected, can cause irreversible pain. And some scars never fade, no matter how much time passes. Riley's family lost their precious little girl, just 3 years old, still discovering the world. Her father, Kevin Fox, was once the main suspect, unfairly accused of killing his own daughter. Though he was eventually exonerated, the trauma of being seen as a monster by the very system meant to protect him, is something he'll carry forever. If justice comes too late, can we still call it justice? A haunting question that lingers long after the case is closed. Scott Eby, the true murderer, is now serving a life sentence. But no punishment, no matter how severe, can bring Riley back. And no court ruling can undo the nightmare that her family was forced to endure. This case stands as a stark example of what can go wrong when investigators let bias cloud their judgment. Instead of following the evidence, law enforcement zeroed in on Kevin, guided by intuition and pressure, rather than facts. If not for DNA evidence, he could have been wrongfully imprisoned. Meanwhile, the real killer would have remained free. Riley was a victim, but so was justice itself. And public trust in the justice system took a devastating blow. Out of unimaginable loss, the Fox family chose not to remain silent. They spoke out. They shared their story, not for sympathy, but to raise awareness, to push for reforms in how crimes like these are investigated and prosecuted. Kevin Fox once said he hoped no other father would ever go through what he did. And through his voice, Riley's memory has become more than a symbol of grief, it's become a call for change. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. If you found this video meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. More haunting, emotional, and eye-opening stories are coming your way. Goodbye for now, and see you in the next video.